Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast for Backlot Banter where we review every single Palme d'Or winner in random order. That's the shtick. We spin the wheel, and today we got a very fortuitous spin because we're talking about Akira Kurosawa's 1980 film Kagemusha, starring Tatsuya Nakadai, Tsutomu Yamazaki, Kenichi Hagiwara. We've got lots of Japanese greats. We've got Akira Kurosawa at the helm. This is a samurai movie. Actually, much like the film we talked about last week, because we did Gate of Hell 1953, and we thought that film should go at spot number 29 with a 6.5. Spot number 25 on the list. And so now we get to compare and contrast the two subsequent Japanese films from this like 20-year time period in Palme d'Or history with Kurosawa's Kagemusha. So very much looking forward to talking about this film. We will get to that in a moment. Abram, I do believe you've got a comment for us to ponder a little quickly before we move on and talk about the film.
I do believe I have just that.
Moving fast through this one. Here we go.
We're going to head back to the class, which we reviewed a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
And we're going to have another comment here from the treasured son of Quest for the Bestest, John Tour 11, who says the following. Tanner got me thinking, American...
That's rare.
Boom, got me.
American school dramas, thinking emoji. The only thing I can think of is The Breakfast Club from the 80s. It's one of those movies me and my friends watched in the 90s. But it's not really a school drama, is it?
No.
My next thought goes...
It's a detention comedy.
Well,
my next
detention
thought
is the opposite of school, really.
Yeah.
That's true. My next thought goes to Buffy the TV show, but that's not a movie. So I got nothing. Monocle emoji then.
Nice.
Wrap it up.
That comment makes me think of like Dazed and Confused, but I don't find that to be
Not
very
a drama.
intellectual either. It's fun. It's a good movie, but I don't think it fits in the same category as The Class.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah, this is why I brought it up. It's not really a genre, at least in the modern sense, in the U.S. in our film landscape.
Well, thank you, John Tor, for
genre in the modern sense. What does that mean? Like, did genres used to mean different things?
No, like an older genre.
I meant. Sorry, yeah, I meant like you can probably find like maybe older like school dramas.
Oh,
but
sure,
not
like
really,
Goodbye, Mr. Chips.
Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Does like the children's hour count?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah.
But ultimately, those are often more about the teachers than the school or the children. I don't know.
Whatever. Thank you, John Tor. Abram, you were gonna say nothing.
I was just gonna say that I said goodbye, Mr. Chips, to my bag of tortilla chips that I finished off really
Not
quick.
funny.
That's
It's not funny. Thanks for not saying that, by the way. Thanks for not bringing
that
joke.
really would have derailed the episode. Yeah.
I'm putting us back on that MF train track. Kagemusha, Tucker, what did you think? Get us started. Oh wait,
I think I want to hear. Yeah,
I think I'm putting the cart before the horse here. Tanner, what happens in this movie? In this Akira Kurosawa flick?
Oh, sure. So, you guys remember last week when we were talking about Gate of Hell and we talked about the first 5 minutes and we were like, oh man, I was really worried that it was going to be like all like historical, daimyos and Japanese clans and families feuding and I have to remember all these names. That is actually what Kagemusha is about. So I'll do my best. This film follows largely the Takeda clan. And they are headed up by, of course, Shinjin Takeda, who is a samurai warlord who is seeking to take over and unite the warring clans of Japan. Okay, he wants to invade Kyoto, take down Nobunaga, unite the entire island of Japan, essentially. And hey, that's all well and good, except guess what? He gets fucking shot. Oops, he's dead. Okay?
He gets shot.
So we have to
Shingen
replace
shot
him
dead in the Bronx.
Exactly.
No. Can't have shit in Detroit.
We have to replace him with a thief who is rescued from crucifixion by Shingen's brother, who happens to look exactly like Shingen.
No. He wasn't saved. Oh, no, he was.
Yeah,
we're saved because of him. Whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't
little
matter.
Easter humor for you.
It's fortuitous that we watch this around Easter as well. And then, this thief is like, hey, I don't really know how to be a samurai warlord. And they're like, don't worry, you'll figure it out. And he kind of does, but then he gets exposed, and then he gets outside, then he gets exorcised from the clan, and then the son, Shingen's son, has to take over, and he's a little bit hot-headed when it comes to going into battle. So the Takeda clan is ultimately defeated, and the warring clans of Japan rage on by the end of this film.
Now, Tucker, is your turn to tell us what you thought of the plot and the movie as a whole that Tanner just described.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the larger context of warring clans and the historical battles and different kinds of leaders and political subterfuge, as it was in the samurai era. But what I found interesting about this movie is that the middle chunk is much more about a fish out of water guy who's not used to all this stuff that we're not familiar with, right? He doesn't know how to act in all of these rituals. He doesn't know what to do when he's dealing with leading an army, but he is pushed into a situation where he does need to learn that. And I think that core narrative of the Kagemusha character, the Shadow Warrior, he's the guy who's filling in the shoes.
He's not given actually a name in the film, of course. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. I think that scenario and that character is really, really compelling. I think framing it around him and having it be sort of a fish out of water, like we're learning it alongside him. It brings out a little bit of humor. It sort of acts as a critique of the ways in which these high-class leaders are like treating each other and the rituals and stuff. I think that's really, really compelling. But that is the core of the movie, but there is still a lot of other stuff going on outside. And so I think that I was really, really engaged for the central element of the movie. I wanted to see how this guy was going to deal with the situation, what it was going to teach me about the culture and politics of the time. But as soon as we went outside of that and started dealing with the more traditional warring warlords of feudal Japan, I started to get a little bit muddy. There's some really cool battle sequences. I think the production design and costumes and cinematography are top notch. But the movie, so I think it's very good. And I think that central narrative is unique and strong and certainly stands out to me. But it's when the movie, before it really establishes him and after he's kicked out of that role, that I start to get a little bit more, a little less engaged with what's going on, because it does feel more comparable to other historical dramas and political warring dramas that I've seen. And so I do like the movie on the whole. I think it's beautiful. I think the actors are very good, and I like that central narrative. But it is also still, at the end of the day, a larger historical political drama of which I have absolutely zero connection to, and it's a lot of terminologies and places and characters that I cannot keep straight in my head.
Can I hop in? Can I hop in here and just say what I think Tucker's thinking?
I have to go grab my notebook, but so I won't hear your thoughts. But I'll be right back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Uh-oh. Everyone make fun of him in the comments.
Okay, if I can hop in there and just say what I think. What I'm thinking Tucker's saying, which is also my thought about the movie, is that it's too damn long. It's really great, but it's too damn long. I think there is a lot to like about this film, namely the cinematography, namely the 100 billion extras that are cast in it. I think the central conceit of our character, our doppelganger, the filling in of the leader is really, really cool, and I'm very interested in it. But it's too long. We drag. In the end, we spend a lot of time thinking about the human cost of battle, which I think is an actual specific directorial choice. But I think it leads this movie to being a little bit disconnected from itself at times. It's a little wandery. And unfortunately, I've seen a later Kurosawa film that is not all that different from this one, Ron, which I cannot help but compare because I think these are very much in conversation with each other. It's like Kagemusha is the steps leading up to the castle of Ron. And so I'm going to cast that film pretty much out of my mind for the rest of the review, but I will note that I have thought and compared these two films a lot. And I do have to put Ron on a little higher pedestal. Its source material, let's hide it from Tucker, is Shakespeare, so the plot is like top notch and like really well done. But Kagemusha has some really interesting elements. The politics are pretty cool. If you know a little more about Japanese history and about this time period of it's like right before the unification, one of the other characters in this plot ends up unifying the country. And so that is pretty damn interesting. And by and large, it's fun to watch. it's incredibly staged, just like production design out the wazoo. I'm so curious to where they shot some of these things. I thought, like, having just traveled there, I was like, is that a castle that I was at? Did I look at that rock? And is it the same rock? I like to believe it is. I don't actually
sure.
know, but in my heart of hearts, I visited the filming locations of this movie, and it
Mm.
was damn cool. So, by and large, good. A bit bored towards the end of it. I'm gonna choose
Hmm.
Abram to go next.
Stalemate.
Whoa. Whoa, my turn. Yeah, I don't know about this one. I
Oh,
think
okay.
I think that if I had to choose, well, let me rewind for a second. I'm not a super experienced Kurosawa watcher. I have seen Throne of Blood, which I really, really like, and I've also seen A
Sure.
Fistful of Dollars. And that's a little plagiarism joke for you there, folks.
I see.
Look that one up on your own time.
Uh-huh.
So I'm largely coming to this film without a real
Have you actually only seen one Kurosawa film then? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, interesting.
Yeah, and so I was excited to watch this.
Too.
I have
Well, yeah, this is a joke. I get it.
I have a long list of Kurosawa films I would like to see. I don't know. This film is very methodical. Something I was really paying attention to was how the performances are so considered, how every action is very deliberate, how every piece of dialogue is sort of accompanied by a pause, how a lot of moments in the plot in the world invite a sort of a beat of quiet contemplation. The film rarely employs its score. We spend a lot of time in silence. I think it's interesting, but I just can't escape the feeling of boredom in this one. I just can't. I don't know how else to frame it really. I think that on a screenplay level, there's this sort of dueling tension in my mind where the film is both very global and very particular when we're thinking about this concept of the double. We're thinking about these small interpersonal moments of deceit. I think that's quite compelling, but the larger framework to me doesn't sort of feel like it exists with the same stakes, even though these two things are doubtlessly intertwined. And I think a lot of that is just, for me, like I was saying, this very methodical sense of space created in these very deliberate filmmaking decisions just make it, for me, quite a slog, frankly. I couldn't find my way into Kagemusha really at all.
Tanner, agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kagemusha is a very interesting film for the context surrounding it, of course. And as for the film itself, I think it's very strong in a number of aspects. It ends up being towards the bottom of Kurosawa's that I've seen, especially for stuff that comes at this point in his career. And it is an interesting point in his career, a very tumultuous point in his career that I'd like to talk about a little bit for some context, especially if you see a couple names that pop up in the credits of this thing.
Yeah, which you talked about at the end of the episode last time.
Yeah. But yeah, as for the film itself, I think it is quite strong. It is a lower tier Kurosawa, which means it's better than like 80% of movies. It doesn't fully click together, I think, in its pursuits of his classic like humanist storytelling, and then his proclivities for like his explorations of grand scale samurai historical epics. It is interesting that this is like the first time, and I think only time, that he tries to do like a historical story. Like this is based on historical fact, and we're using real names, real places, real battles, etc., etc. Which I think maybe to your point, Aram, can make it feel a little stale at points. But I think he still has this ability to drill to the heart of exactly what Tucker was talking about, the alienated man at the center of this story, this power struggle. And I think Kagemusha is a very interesting exploration of power as a concept and everything. So I'd like to talk about all that. I think it's quite strong, but also feels not as cohesive as something that he would have made just a couple of years later, like Ron, to Timo's point. There you go.
Yeah.
I interconnected all your points.
Wow.
Look at me go. Yeah.
Wow.
Synthesis.
Yes. Tucker, what thought should we synthesize next? What little path should our merry band of discussers take? about this
I
film?
think we should get the element out of the way that I think we're on the whole the least positive about, which is the greater context of historical battles and warring clans and stuff. And not that I think we will agree that is a bad time to set a movie, not a bad concept to set a story within. But I think the way in which this movie portrays it is, especially as out being people out of the culture, out of the time period, and out of the history, unaware largely of the history this movie takes place in. It is very word salady to a guy like me, and that is something that I really struggled to find my way into. And it wasn't until we were introduced to our central character that I was like, okay, honestly, I felt like I could put it out of my mind. Like, it doesn't really matter because I can focus in on the guy. But especially as the movie comes to a close, I think that third act is so concerned with the ways in which the different battles are being set up and in which the battles are like meaning things for a greater warring context of who's gonna get Kyoto or whatever. I think that is, again, that's my biggest issue with the movie, and it spends so much time on that. And as Abram mentioned, I think it was very, very important to bring up something I was thinking, especially within those political conversational sequences. They're so slow. The amount of times that someone will deliver like an order or mention another warlord or something, and then everyone will just sit there for a second and think about it. They'll take like 6 or 7 beats and be like,
of these.
"Oh, there's a lot of mustache twirling in this movie." Yeah, a lot of doing the stroke. They do that. And that gives this movie a very distinct feel. But I totally agree with Abram in that was where I really started to lose connection to what was going on. As they're talking about this stuff I don't really understand and spending so much time on it and so many slow beats, that is where I felt myself disconnecting the most from the film. And I don't really have any particularly strong memories or critiques of it because, again, it operates in kind of a mesh in the back of my mind.
It's pervasive. It is an attitude that Kurosawa takes towards pacing out these sequences. And sometimes it is to dramatic effect. I think specifically to the moment when, I'm sorry, 1 second, I gotta get the names right here. Katsuyori, Shingen's son, basically tries to sabotage Kagemusha and his role as like the stand-in, what's the double in this meeting of the generals, and he's like, "Oh hey, what do you think, Master General Shingen?" Wink,
he calls him father, which is a character plot line that's important.
Yes. And then there is a long beat that is meant that carries suspense with it, of course, of like how is he gonna get out of this one?
Yeah.
And then of course he manages to use a little bit of family historical legacy speak to get his way out of that one. But not all the sequences are like that. A lot of them are deliberate planning of attacks or really taking in information for the weight of like what it means that, hey, this castle was just attacked. What should we do? It's a lot of that.
Yeah, I think that the value of face in this movie is something that it really wants us to kind of grapple with, that like the reason for all these big long pauses is that these characters have such strong duties and obligations socially to uphold within this court, and our fish out of water story hinges on there being such strict requirements for how you act and what you say and when you respond and how you go about all of it, not just how you talk, but like how you walk and how you move, like the servants who shuffle around on their knees instead of like getting up and walking like I would do in a situation like that. That I think is a big emphasis on that Kurosawa is working with and trying to get us to understand. But I agree that the result is it's very alienating as a viewer to watch. Thinking about like our historical context, I do expect to be kind of inundated with ritual and to be very, just as a viewer, kind of not necessarily confused, but feeling very outside what's going on in the just our scenes like this. And so the political context, the way it kind of impacts my understanding is that I think I know something. I think I know that, okay, Tokugawa unites the warring clans of this period sometime. I don't know when, but, and that's it. That's the extent of my knowledge about this context that we're in. And so that I find myself still, even though I'm like, oh, I think I know stuff. No, I'm still at the bottom of that Dunning-Kruger curve. I don't actually know anything. And so the ways that our politics are moving around and I'm supposed to know who this person is, sort of. But I'm also supposed to just kind of interpret how they are as a character through the way that they talk in these big, long dialogue scenes. That can be very tricky to understand, especially when we spend time on this geopolitical plot as opposed to the time of this very interesting character dynamic of Shingen and Kagemusha before Shingen dies. We choose to not talk about this. We choose to be involved in geopolitics. And I think that is kind of my major critique of the film, is that this character and relationship conceit is so strong, and we just kind of favor relationships with other nations instead of
Yeah.
relationships between these characters, which Kurosawa knows how to do. He knows how to do these characters really well. And I think it was just a choice on the direction of the film, that this film would be more political, more historical, as opposed to character driven. And I think,
the
the
reason
result
why
of
that's
it is really clear on us.
The reason why that's a major critique of mine is that as the movie transitions to the middle part, where the core character of the Kagemusha is the central thrust of the film, and we're watching a lot of sequences.
I'm so curious about this guy in the middle of the film.
Exactly, and you're like, all right, the shackles are off. We can dive deep into who this guy is and this situation, and we get about halfway down in there, and then he kind of like fades off, and like there's like some time skips. I'm like, no, wait, I want to see that. No, and then even in a 3-hour long movie, there are like some major time skips. I'm like, man, some interesting stuff happened. And then he gets kicked out. He gets his identity revealed, and then he basically disappears. And so I was so ready to have the movie be like an upward climb for me, where I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And as we keep going, it'll tie in better, and I will get more invested in the geopolitics and stuff. And then when he's sort of ripped out of the narrative, I'm like, no, you were so close. And then I want to see what's going on with him, and I want to see his life as a guy who was in a position of power. And then what does he do for a job? How do other people treat him? Does he talk about this experience? Like, who are his friends? And we don't deal with any of that. And I'm like, no, I want to see that.
At that point, we're 30 minutes from the end of the movie, 20 minutes from the end of the movie.
So we need 45 minutes to cut around to dead bodies at the end of the movie.
Yeah, I think it's longer because there's like really long sequences.
Which is, I think Kurosawa highlighting the human cost of this battle.
I have a thesis that explains all of that away. It's still too long.
Sure, fair enough. I know, Abram, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. I think that the film is interested in this idea of doubling Shingen, not necessarily from the interpersonal angle, even though that concerns a good portion of the film, but more so this notion that the charisma and shadow of a leader is in these in this time of this feudal conflict very, very important. And the anxieties from other lords as to whether or not he is alive, and these sort of heightened political stakes around his deceit are important. And so I guess for me, I don't really view these portions of the film as being that far apart. I think what ultimately doesn't work for me so well is that I don't know how good of a job the film does at sort of driving home larger tension. And to me, this is sort of an issue I have. There's a lot of consternation about spies and about this wider notion of whether or not posing as Shingen is actually proving effective. However, I don't really know if I feel that. I think that the film is often contented with simply on a plot level reaffirming that status quo more so than it is using any sort of filmic technique or hiding or sort of recontextualizing the information the viewer has to leave us feeling any sort of anxiety about the deceit either. Like I like the times when we'll go to the other lords and we'll leave the deceit behind for a while. But in those sequences, I know, right? I know the wider political battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't find them to be particularly effective in giving me a real feeling. They sort of serve to check in and reestablish that perhaps the ruse unto this point is still good. I like the ending sequence, even though it is certainly very protracted in its editing in particular. I mean, how many times do we have to see the horse get up, right? But this this very like direct marriage of the now exposed double, frantic and powerless in the
Yep.
context of this battle that without his shadow is falling apart, right? I think that there's a really strong merger of these plot ideas and the filmmaking tools that Kurosawa is employing. I just don't think that the way we question the efficacy of the double throughout most of the film is that interesting as a viewer.
Yeah. You have me
Sure.
thinking about Shingen's characterization. What do we know about this guy that we are doubling? And what do we know about this leader as the beginning of the film up until his assassination? And I do find him to be a very interesting character. The emphasis on family, the emphasis on this, like his four pillars, the four corners of
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
is sort of like it's a semi
Avatar,
it's
yeah.
like a faith, but it's you know it's kind of the family creed or the clan creed of what they
Right.
stand for. And like his characterization as in relation to power, and you're talking about the shadow of the leader. And Kurosawa has this great shot where we see, I forget if it's,
Yes.
I think it's the double, right? It's Kagemusha.
It
Yeah.
is. I thought it was his brother. No,
One
no,
of
no, no.
the-
Sorry, it's after after Shingen's brother. Hang on, I can get the name. 1 second.
Nobukado?
After Nobukado has this whole line, has this whole sort of speech about like I was my brother's shadow,
Mhm.
like I lived in his shadow, and I was that became my life. After that sequence, you're right, Timo, is when we
just pan up to
Kagemusha
this.
stands up and walks away, and we behold and zoom on his shadow being cast.
Yeah. And so I think that the important kind of ideological base that we have to start with for Shingen's character is expressed in a line early in the film when he's talking, when it might even be in this opening shot, this opening scene, which is
Yes,
I really-
with the three
this
of them,
one,
the three lookalikes, basically.
the three lookalikes are sitting, and this, I think the pacing and for the beginning of the movie is really holding on this, and it's super long. It's the dialogue goes on forever with big pauses. Very effective opener to the film. The ways
Yeah,
that
totally unique.
Shingen says, "I will unite Japan at any cost. I will unite Japan so that I can put a stop." This is the self-justification, so that I can
Yes.
put a stop to the rivers of blood and the mountains of bodies. And I think that this justification in his mind of why he wants his flags to fly over Kyoto, which is the other kind of, he has these two outward goals. He says his stated wish when he thinks he's getting close to dying to the rest of the clan members is that, no, I will not die. You will replace me with a double. We will not take Kyoto, and we will continue on
You'll-
until my
Yes.
heir is old enough to rule. And
Yes.
then what does he actually say when he's about to die? When he's like literally on
He's like,
death's door? He's like,
see it.
no,
It's right
no,
there.
take the city, war. He has this change of heart. And so I think that this opposing, these two diametrically opposed wants within the main character, within our main leader, then having that both out and known to other characters could cause problems politically in the court, but also for the double, because what does he do? The leader was conflicted on that, and that this shadow of how he needs to act to fill the shoes is like uncertain. It's not all that clear, which leaves room for the generals and the son to politic and to destroy the whole thing. So I find
Yeah.
that this our leader character, now that I'm like kind of diving in and thinking about it, actually provides me a lot of characterization to then emulate, for Kagemusha to have to fill, and the
Yes.
ways that he can and cannot, especially with the horse and with the child, are that kind of tension of the back half of the movie's plot. Although I do agree with Abram that our early tension doesn't have enough stakes. Like, we have these Hidden Fortress-esque spy characters, right? These kind of somewhat bumbling, somewhat competent watchouts that then, like, I don't know, nothing happens
disappear.
of it. They just like disappear. They like
Yeah.
kind of get found out. They kind of get caught, but not bad enough. They don't show up later. Like, they do show up later. So
For a second, yeah.
what,
Mhm.
you know, what comes of that? The ruse worked, I guess, until it didn't. That's what the point is, maybe.
The Timo, your earlier point of yes, the ideas of these powerful leaders and their iron grip, their iron fist, and how they rule and the power that they represent is, I think, largely what the film is concerned with, and the idea of filling those shoes of succeeding a leader who was very powerful and very successful in their pulling of the levers of control and everything. That is what the film is really concerned with, and how you can't fill that role. I think is very interesting, because you have Kagemusha, of course, who steps into this role, and for the most part, for damn near 3 years, like 1.5, 2 years, is like doing the things that he needs to do. He, even by the grace of God or luck or whatever, is able to lead the Takeda clan to victory in battle, which ultimately sort of makes him a little too big for his britches. Makes him a little overconfident, which is when he rides this horse. He thinks he can ride Shingen's horse, and ultimately fails and exposes himself for who he really is. He doesn't expose his genitals, of course.
There's
Sorry.
Thought machine stopped in its tracks.
I said the words, and I couldn't help myself from going. But getting the train back on the tracks here is that I think the film is also pointing to this dichotomy, or this human failure of leaders to do the smart thing, do the correct thing, lead your people to safety and take the safest route, but also take the self-serving route. That's what leaders want to do. They want to serve their own interests, their own narcissistic needs, to gain power and control and show how powerful and smart and cunning they are. I think we can see this in Shingen, of course, like Timo mentioned, but also in Katsuyori, who is an accomplished military leader and able to lead the Takeda clan, as numerous characters say. Is that, like, I don't know why your father didn't choose you to be his heir, but he could have. Like, you're a smart guy. You're not a fuck up necessarily.
You're not fail son.
But then, when he does get to take those reins, when he does get to lead the Takeda family, the first thing he does is like, all right, we're doing it, full steam ahead, taking out the other clans, we're taking Kyoto, baby, here we go. Even though we get the symbols of the rainbows and everything else point to, hey, maybe we should like take a pause and not do this, as our old wise leader once said. I think these scales of power and these scales of what is smart and what is self-serving for a leader are scales that are weighed by numerous characters throughout the film.
Yeah, and it's that dynamic between Katsuyori and Kagemusha that I think is one of the most interesting tensions in the movie. Because I, as a viewer, and as I'm learning what the situation is that Kagemusha's been put into, and then in a wider context, the relationships that he then has thrust upon him, because he is filling in for someone else's role and someone else's dynamics. He's got to be a grandfather and a father to people he doesn't know. I'm like, oh man, that is fascinating. That is emotionally complex. That is politically complex. And especially from Katsuyori, who is, I think, one of the best defined characters in the movie in terms of like distinct personality and goals, and also looks like he's a much thinner frame, and he doesn't have the facial hair that like literally all the other generals have. He, on a personality side, I kept putting myself in his shoes and like thinking about the frustration that he has of not only having his young son be the heir, as that's like an early established conflict, And obviously that creates some tension within him. But then watching is like, oh, well, even though your father died, he didn't choose you. He chose the secret X option that was find a random guy that he doesn't know that looks like him.
Yeah.
And but as a leader, as a political situation, like Katsuyori has to respect the wishes of his father because his father was the leader, and Kagemusha then becomes the leader, and like he's got this like a group of guys that
And
are always
all the
around him, like
generals
giving
are
him
like
advice.
conspiring to keep the ruse up, and
Yeah,
they themselves find use in it too, or else they
Yeah.
wouldn't do it.
The
Well, and-
ability to like just be able to like coast by on the wills of these generals is pretty interesting too. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
Everyone's got something to say.
Yeah, I'm interested in the moment. I believe it's shortly after we've rebuked this challenge you were mentioning earlier towards Kagemusha, asking for his view on what the clan should do. There's this moment when the generals are meeting together, and they're sort of both very laudatory in private of how Kagemusha navigated
Yeah.
the situation and his wit, but also very careful to be metered about that and not be
Mhm.
open about that. And I think about that, and I think about another very brief moment towards the end of the film. I believe it's actually shortly before we find him bucked from Shinjin's horse, where there's this almost throwaway line of dialogue about how Kagemusha is moving around the castle without anybody. He's moving around by himself, and this is something
yeah.
he's not supposed to do. But the line of dialogue is something like, to the effect of, he's a man walking around his own house. And this way that the deceit is treated and leveraged and lost control of is very interesting to me. This relationship formed with Takemaru, the grandson, this utility and battle of the facade, but the need to have certain people not buy in, for the generals to maintain a degree of control, I think is very interesting. And I think it again unites the personal and the political in an effective way.
Yeah.
I really like that a lot, and I like when we spend the time in the film to look at how Kagemusha is being perceived not necessarily by the enemy, but by the people who
Yeah.
have ostensibly orchestrated his
Yeah.
next 3 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like to think
Yeah,
that, the generals ultimately are the ones with the power. They are the ones that keep the ruse around, and the way that they have to fight and negotiate with Kagemusha to maintain this balance that, he needs to learn and keep his end of the deal up, but at the same time, he gets things as a result. He gets concubines, he gets servants. He has to fill, like we've talked about a bunch, he has to fill this role. And in that line, when the scene you're talking about where they laud him for really, stepping into it and figuring it out in the moment, thinking quickly, they note that like this is a dangerous path, that we can't let him go down any farther down this idea, because they don't say it, of course, but the natural conclusion is that like he then just straight up becomes the ruler because he actually
Yeah.
takes grasp of the power that the seat holds, that like the pedestal that he sits on, the throne, like literally is the source of the power because everybody else buys into it. And as long as
Well,
the generals are there dictating what to do from him, they are in control. And I mean, you can kind of see the twinkle in Kagemusha's eyes that like he could take control of this
Yeah.
situation. But, what are the steps to do that? Is he a smart enough man to do that? The film doesn't go there, but I do feel that tension, especially from this scene that Abram's talking about onward.
yeah, and I really like his character a lot, and I like the tension and the growth that character has, because at the beginning of the movie, when you see him and he is whining and he is screaming and he is dirty and like he is a very unlikable, aggressive character who you're like, oh man, this guy. But honestly, he whips himself into shape real damn quick.
Yeah.
And I think watching that happen and him come to the quick realization that this is something that he not only can do, but he can like change himself to fit this role and be surprisingly competent at it, to very, very good. I think that's the emotional hook of the movie, is watching this guy come to terms with the situation he's in and learn where power can then be used, even by someone who has no family history with it, has no skills in this area. But when he's given the title, and of course, many people believe that he holds power because he looks like the guy, and because there are, quote unquote, yes men around him saying that, this is, what are you talking about? This is the leader. This is
Our glorious leader is indeed wearing pants.
Yeah. What's the problem with you? I think that watching him come into that role and to the point where he's leading that battle and is making technically making high level political decisions and like has choices put on his shoulder where he can't be like whispered in the ear, advised by the generals. I'm like, it really brings to my mind, like, what is leadership? What is the role of a leader? How can someone fill it? And he actually is able to do that without any formal training, without any family history, without the knowledge growing up like Takemaru is, of that this is something to be thrust upon him. He's able to fill that role surprisingly well. And that is what I liked watching so much, which again is also why having that time skip, or like having that element of him, we don't see a lot of him like on his own time as he's like, as his tenure is wrapping up, and of course it comes to an early end. But I was wanting to see him more in that area where he does have that twinkle in his eye, where he does feel like he's a little bit too big for his britches, because at a certain point, the hubris comes to his downfall. But at a certain point, I'm like, no, you've earned the right to be so big in your britches, because like you're actually doing the damn thing, to be honest.
But my thing with this film is, and I don't know if this is something that Kurosawa is purposefully layering into the story, or if it's something that I'm extrapolating out a little bit, because I have a question for you, gentlemen, of something that I may have interpreted differently than you guys. But I want to say this first. This reading may also be coming from a 21st century American political lens, where like, hey, we've had various leaders of varying degrees of competency in the big chair, as it were. And like, you have to think about like, well, what are the inherent things that make somebody a leader? Are there of course inherent traits that make someone capable of these things? And how much of a society, how much of a structure of power is able to run on its own, with nobody really minding the wheel except like a conglomeration of people who are, just trying to keep up the status quo, not trying to raise any alarms necessarily. I think that's also something that is potentially at play in Kagemusha, with the highs and lows of Kagemusha's reign, as they double as Shingen, and then the role of the generals as well, making the real calls. But the question I had for you, gentlemen, was this: the scene where it's in this robot, when they're taking real Shingen's body out in a giant vase out into the middle of the lake to dump it as his burial, in secret, of course. And this is the scene where Kagemusha decides, he's like, you know what? I'm doing this. I'm in. I have to do it. Like, this is the deal. This is the deal that I've made. There is a flip in his character that I interpreted to be out of necessity, not that he is becoming fully convinced by the weight of the in honor and power of the Takeda clan or anything like that. That is something that is trying to be imparted into him. But I think it's mostly it's a moment of self-preservation more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think question if we agree with that or not.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's very obvious, personally.
I'm not. Besides, like a primal, low on the Maslow triangle of, like food and shelter is like the reason that he seems to do it in my mind. I don't see him buying into the honorable position of it, or the, like, say, the kingdom part. He has some
He
nationalism.
eventually does, is the thing about his
Yeah, I
character.
think he does.
Yeah, he comes around to it, and I think that there is like an element of like this nascent patriotism in his character that he is like uh, eventually comes to the reasoning of like doing this for his people, for the clan. Like he despite being a criminal was always part of the Takeda clan and has some sort of extra connection to this system and these people, the high ups of the clan, that is unrelated to him being thrust into this duplicate situation. That like he comes from somewhere deep inside of him, he finds a patriotism to him.
Sure.
I think it's complicated, and it makes me recall the first scene in the film where he admonishes Shinjin
For being a murderer, and he's like,
Yeah,
"You're calling me a
honestly.
criminal? You are the bigger criminal." Which is he wrong?
True.
yeah,
Or-
and so I think of that disposition he has, and it's because of that disposition even that that Shinjin advocates for him to be trained. I think that we sort of have this, if not a political ideology, this investment in his character from the beginning of the narrative, but we also have in a more pressing sense his life being on the line, there being frankly no real choice for him.
Yeah. He is either Shinjen or he is dead.
Yeah,
We do obviously escalate from there to where he is becoming more desperate to hold this position and willing to work without reward as he pleads at one point. But I think a lot of, certainly the most artistically interesting sequence of the film, the dream sequence, where he's being chased, and when he wakes up from the nightmare and with a shout and the guards come in, what he tells them is that I was surrounded by a million enemies, when indeed he was being chased through this beautifully created, I'm assuming those are hand painted sets, this beautifully created,
I mean,
like dream tapestry. It's just Shinjin in full armor chasing him, and it's a not so subtle, but I think beautifully executed illustration of this imposter sense that he has. And I think that you have to look at that scene also in conversation with the changing attitude he has towards his role as double. And I think what's really interesting to me by the end of the film is the way that he's sort of entangling this imposter sense, this at this point trained role of double, this self-preservation notion of needing to take on this position, this ideology that we get a hint of at the beginning of the film. I think that it's sort of lack of willingness to squarely characterize exactly why Kagemusha does what he does, or exactly which of the myriad benefits he gets are the benefits that he takes the most value out of, is interesting. And I think it makes the end of the film, to me, probably the most rich part of the film.
Sure. Well, yeah, I wanted to jump in and ask, like, or say, like, the reason I asked about, his whole commitment to the ideal and everything like that is because of a video that I watched that gave like historical context to the story being told in here, mostly by by a big nerd guy who cares about Japanese history, and that was his that was his kind of read, I think, is what he implied, is that like, oh, this guy becomes overwhelmed by like the patriotism and the honor being thrust upon him, as opposed to the thing that we all sort of got out of this story. And
well, because I think the end of the film somewhat supports that. I think that that feeling, the patriotism expands. Like he dies at the end of the film when he runs up against the musket line, well after all the other soldiers have. And I think that this connects with the scene that the moment of the scene from the beginning of the film, confronting Shingen about this murderous nature of being a leader and sending armies to battle, and the opposition between Shingen and Katsuyori about what do you do as a leader in the situation. Are you like, swift as the wind or strong as the mountain? And Shingen's position was to be like the mountain and to be, to hold steadfast, keep your status quo. And so Kagemusha embodies this, I think, out of a like, what the hell else am I gonna, what ideology else am I gonna pick? Like this is a good one. And I read that as Shingen's intention. This is a cultivated thing that he would pick up on and then do it. And so the consequences of not being like a mountain, of not having that kind of defensive status quo preservationist nature, is the rivers of blood and the mountain of bodies. And that is the reason for this extended long battle sequence at the end, where I don't think we're cutting around to a horse getting up all the time. We're cutting around to like 10,000 horses dying. It's a little, our modern eyes, I think, view it a little bit harsher because we are used to maybe CGI for stuff like this, but the undeniable attention that Kurosawa puts on the bloodbath, the ill-advisedness of this battle plan, I mean, if you even just think strategically about how this battle is set up, you have a fortified position, these like logs, this very interesting, like, it's a shooting gallery. It's entirely set up to be.
These guys are like down in a valley or whatever behind the musket men or the the musketeer. What do you call those guys?
Yeah,
I was about to call them
musket
musketeers.
corps.
I'm like, I don't think that's right.
The Japanese Minutemen. Okay, they get up and it's
soldiers, maybe.
Yeah, soldiers. The final battle is very opposite, strategically, ideologically, from the ways that were shown Shingen operates and the way that Kagemusha attempts to try to operate. And the kind of backswing of the pendulum is the undoing of the clan. Somewhat, I think.
It's also, I think it connects into what you were saying earlier, Tanner, which I really like, this notion of who is running this government body, right? And we see separately the body and face of the military apparatus get killed. We see Kagemusha get killed after everybody is run through, and there's this notion shortly before, although it's sort of echoed throughout, of the mountain has moved, right?
Well, I love the shot before Kagemusha runs in, through the mountains of bodies to pick up to try and reclaim the clan flag or whatever. That we cut back to like the little stools or the chairs that the leaders of the generals sit on, and they're empty.
Yeah,
they're just gone. They hightailed it out of there. It's like, well, shit, man. They're like they left this behind. They're like, they cut their losses and left, but Kagemusha did not. He wholeheartedly believes in this stuff now.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting for me is when you mentioned the idea of him doing this for a sense of self-preservation. I think it is absolutely true. And we see him being opportunistic at the beginning of. He doesn't have. We actually don't really know almost anything about him other than he was a criminal. And I think it's very heavily implied that he doesn't have anything else from his life. He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have a sincere role to play in society.
They call him a drifter. He's a drifter from the north.
Yeah, and what he then discovers, which I think is what leads him to that more sincere sense of nationalism and patriotism, is a sense of purpose and a sense of people respecting him, which has not been the case at that point in his life. And so he buys into the role and buys into his confidence and buys into the patriotism because people actually treat him well and respect him, and he's got people that are like laughing at his jokes and like that are like helping him out in a more genuine way. And I also think
who know that he's not the leader, right? You have his
but they still do treat him.
They have
in
to
a
keep up
decent
appearances,
yeah.
But I'm thinking about
even
his
behind
servants.
the scenes, like I think
in behind the scenes, like
they do actually enjoy his company to a certain and like even if it's like behind the scenes they're kind of like conspiring. They like. They feel like they're working together with him, and I think is like gives him a sense of like he's in the in group now, which he's always been in the out group. And the extra layer on top that I think is really what cements all of this is he does end up developing a very sincere and genuine relationship with his quote unquote grandson Takimaru, who is a really fascinating character. And once Takimaru genuinely starts treating him as a grandfather, respects him, finds his stories interesting, thinks he's funny, is like complimentary of him. That I think is why he is as steadfast, as strong-willed, as confident as he is. That leads, of course, to his hubris downfall. But like he's like, if I am now respected I now have a role in society. I have a quote unquote grandson who treats me well.
I've won a
I'm
battle.
dressed. Yeah, like I think all of that makes sense, and it like really for me it really tracks. Of a guy that we don't know a lot about on a very human level, you can understand this need and desire for a sense of belonging, for a sense of respect, for a sense of purpose and family that I think he ends up discovering, and that to me, that's the core of what this film is watching this man who has very little purpose in his life discover purpose and find a confidence in that that does lead to his downfall. But I think that that's more a relatable human error, right? Of he's like, well, you know, if everything else went well, like why would I be able to ride the horse? Like that's not ridiculous.
Yeah,
And of course,
I am
it's an
assuming
error,
I am assuming the powers and the attributes of a great leader. I can have it all. You know, I was
But you
thrust
can't
in this
fool-
position by circumstance, but I guess I have it. I guess I have that innate
I've got
thing
the
that
juice.
makes leaders great. Yeah, he has the juice,
the
but in
it
fact,
factor.
he does not have the juice. He
Because
does not have the it factor.
It's so I find it very realistic and satisfying that the kid and the horse are the things that just he can't
Yeah.
fool. They're like, we can fool men, we can fool other leaders, but we
Men can
cannot.
be swayed by you telling them that this thing is
Power.
important, that you
It's be-
telling them this thing is
it's-
powerful.
It's power. That I just realized. The kid doesn't give a shit about power. The
No.
horse doesn't give a shit about power.
No,
And so then it is clear when it's a different person, and that they don't. You know, there's. You know,
Yeah.
they go through all this ritual of like point out all the things that are different with him. He's changed. He's gotten ill.
I
and
think
better.
it's that core question of like, is power / leadership an innate thing or something that is assumed by society, something that is given to you and can be taken away from you? I think the film kind of walks a line. Is like, kind of isn't, is one, but is kind of the other at the same time. It's a central question rather than like a central answer that Kurosawa was trying to impart, I think.
Yeah. I have a different little line of thinking that I was going down while watching the film if we want to investigate that for a moment. I feel like we're kind of wrapping up here. I felt some pretty intense parallels or echoes of World War II in this movie, especially with
Sure.
the way that we shoot and edit our battle sequences. Being a gun, I really think that Kurosawa gets a lot to play with because of our gun-based battles, but also not. Like you have your muskets, but you have like the rules of our battle are very clearly established and unexplained, but we just know them by being existing in the world. Like okay, you fire once and then you run away. But the effect to that is he gets to have these like huge sweeping bam 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 like intense audio design, intense production design with smoke going everywhere. But what he really chooses to shoot in the battle scenes is like dudes running all over the place, like people like ants
Chaos of it
in
yeah.
columns, like scurrying up mountains and waiting for their turn to like run up near a castle wall to try and assault it. And I don't have a lot of sources to back this up, but I really feel kind of a haunting of World War II battles in the Pacific, where you just have chaos and nobody knows what's going on and rifle fire all over the place and people taking cover and explosions going off. That this reckoning with what happened in World War II for soldiers and that the pointlessness of war and all this, kind of common war-related thematic material shows up in the way that Kurosawa directs these action scenes and chooses, I think, really to focus in on the people, the soldiers who are fighting, the moves that they're making, as opposed to the effects of the battle, which we are then shown later. He holds that back until we release that at the end of the film at great length.
Yeah.
I think he also I think he really exaggerates the chaos by putting it in contrast with the really slow, methodical nature of the weaponry they're using. I think my favorite scene in the film is when the sniper who shot
I
Shinjin
love this scene. That is a great scene. Just like dude porn, basically.
Yeah, he's so slowly recreating the act of taking the shot, recreating the position, recreating how he used his plumb level to make sure his gun was in the right place because he was firing at night. He was setting this
In
shot
the
up
dark.
ahead of time. The way we see him put his rifle down, take out a musket ball, feed it in, stuff the rod in the barrel to get it all loaded. It recalls what I was saying at the beginning of the review about this really methodical nature of actions that we see. And I think by having this sequence, obviously it's very plot essential, but moreover having this sequence before the most tremendously chaotic and large battles, I think also creates this this tension as a viewer between the knowledge of what every shot takes and means and the chaos that ensues in this period where warfare with guns is not probably the common mode at this point. The way a single shot creates chaos, having that precede the big battles, I think really puts into context how not only doomed all those horses were, ripped to the horses, but also
horses, of course.
It just creates this really interesting tension of there's so much deliberate process behind each shot from that rifle column, and then this is just everybody getting ripped through. I think you understand the way every bullet lands because of this scene with the sniper.
Mm-hmm. It's the same ritualistic gaze as we use for our social settings. Like, it's the same attention to detail and the same amount of pausing and less so in the battles, but in this sniper scene that you're talking about, like just the intentionality and the specificity of it, to me mirrors the ways that the characters are so intentional and specific about how they talk to each other and about what they say and how they twist their mustache too.
Yeah. In terms of those slower sequences leading up to battle that I find very effective, and frankly find more effective than a lot of the slow-paced conversations that we've been talking about, maybe being part of what distanced us from the movie. One sequence that I found very, very haunting and interesting and effective was when the guy's running through the streets of this very quiet city with all of the different colored soldiers in their different outfits with their different banners, just like sitting on the ground waiting for orders. And you get a sense of the scale and the impact of what is going on in this kind of warfare. Because I mean, I never seen anything like that in my life. I like
that, like just
thousands
truly
upon
thousands of
guys
extras, just in
guys.
armor,
just sitting there.
Think about, you have to make sure that all those dudes get fed at lunch.
Yeah, of course.
In a military sense and also a filmmaking sense.
Like
how different are they at the end of the day, Timo?
Not different at all. Yes.
Art is war.
Shooting a movie is like going to war. Let me tell you that. Primary expert on going to war right here.
This guy right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, there was something. Well, of course, I think Abram brought up the dream sequence, which is obviously probably the moment of visual stylization in the film, which ultimately, it is a dream, and this film it's the only sequence like that, so it makes sense that it sticks out visually. But there are other sequences like the battle that Kagemusha wins, quote unquote. That is like set against set against this red smoke that is billowing out from behind him and everything like that.
Cool.
And numerous sequences of these sunsets in the Japanese countryside, the landscape and everything is so beautifully captured as well.
It's so saturated. You just have these deep green foliage colors, and then you have your sky that Kurosawa just says it'll be whatever color I want it to be, and it's going to be a lot of that color. And then you have all your guys in your armor and your banners, and these banners are made out of solid colors with beautiful geometric designs in them, and I have reason to believe that they're just all the designs. I mean, these clans all had designs like this. This is so you have this historical element,
historical accuracy, right?
The historical element of this setting lends itself so well to this beautifully colorful set of costumes. I mean, if Tucker's complaint about Lord of the Rings is that the orcs and the Gondorians fighting each other is a big mishmash of like gray and black, like this is very much the opposite of that, because our dudes, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter like that
Yeah.
they're camouflaged, they're wearing bright red
This is
or
the-
purple or some,
This is
cool colors.
It's the board game version of warfare.
Yeah.
It's warfare
it's
by
risk.
way of sorry. It's risk. That's
But,
the,
no, but I mean, like it is to our eyes at least cartoonishly representative of like opposing forces that are wearing brightly colored, distinct opposing color
And yet-
armor,
Well, yeah,
charging at one
well, then-
another.
I don't,
Like,
I don't
there's,
think it's
of course,
actually
the
red
opposing
versus
forces.
blue.
It's
It's
not
red versus
that. It's that
blue.
you
It's
have all your different individual generals and your individual groups have their own color and their own seal, and it's
Oh, sure, of
important.
course.
And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fact that you see all these different colors together and not fighting each other is also important. That
It's
you
the Clash of Clans of war films.
sure, bud.
Oh, Tucker, until,
No, I mean that in a sense.
until the
Yeah.
Clash of Clans movie comes out 2028 or whatever.
Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
wait. But I mean like in
They'll have
terms of like
Kurosawa direct that one.
the spearmen and the horsemen and the archers, they all have their distinct iconic colors that you can like
they're
tell what
they're
they are,
the,
like-
the mountain team or the fire team or the wind team or whatever. Yeah.
yeah.
It's good
Dope.
stuff.
That is so dope. I love
Yeah,
it. Like
I love
fire
that stuff
team,
too.
go.
Exactly.
Charge it.
But also, I mean, dope, but like really sad.
Well, yeah,
also, I mean, that
the-
was one of the most like depressing parts of the
Oh,
movie. when-
yeah.
when he's like,
The-
"All right, we're sending another team of guys after they've." It's like they'll never learn,
Yeah.
and it's just like send in another wave of dudes to die in the exact same
'cause that's the
way.
end of the movie that you're talking about, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
hello. Verdun is calling. Hello.
well, it's this interesting thing of how the final sequence is filmed that we were talking about, where you don't necessarily see the battle and the fighting and swords clanking and swinging against each other. What Kurosawa focuses on is just this wall of muskets just firing and firing and firing, and then you cut back to the generals. You cut back to Katsuyori, just looking at it, and just the continuous crackle of the musket fire, like each one of those musket balls connecting with a horse or a soldier or whatever, is just all that's running through your mind. And then yes, we see the aftermath, the carnage, because apparently, and this gets into a little bit of the production stuff, behind the scenes stuff that I do wanna touch on, just to add some last minute context and relayering in hindsight of everything we've just talked about. Apparently Kurosawa did shoot like a full day battle sequence stuff, just soldiers running at each other, carnage, chaos, all that stuff. But in the edit, he did that. He changed his mind, I guess. He decided to focus on the human cost and the death toll and everything like that. Not do like a Seven Samurai, horses riding around, slashing people as they're riding by, all that. I assume
Not
that's
a war
lot of
is
stuff
cool
in-
and awesome kind of edit. Instead of war
Exactly.
sucks and people die.
Is that kind of the battle? How are the battles done in Ron as well, Timo? Because that's his follow up this same decade to this film.
Ron is you take every element of this one and you crank it. You take the surrealistic visuals and you crank it. And so you have it's set a little earlier, I think. So you
Sure.
don't have as much musket fire, but you
Okay.
he focuses on both. He really takes a much wider angle lens to the battles because he's got big sets to work with. So Ron, I think, is a higher budget, and so there's big giant castle sets that dudes are running around inside of. They're shooting and stabbing each other, and then the castle's just like on fire also. So
Sure.
that there's a lot of fire in Ron, and generally it's filmed in wider shots, so
I
you
see,
see
yeah.
more action. And that's why I note that like the battle scenes in this are so centered around these like
Mhm.
people scurrying around, because Ron is actually just kind of centered on like
Yeah,
the
we're taking a
carnage and the
wide
gore
shot
and
of
what's
everybody
going on.
fighting each other. Sure.
And that's the one with the really famous like guy gets stabbed and the blood just like huge amounts of blood go on the walls and it's very
Sure,
red
sure.
paint kind of looking. That's Ron's signature look.
Yeah. And I think it's also informed by
Any relation to Ron's Gone Wrong? I had to get that
Good
one.
reference.
That's
Sorry.
good. I like that. Well, transitioning out of that to something quite differently, I think that the attitude towards the violence and everything in this film is emblematic of what Kurosawa was going through at the time. I did a little bit of reading on like this era of his career, and Kurosawa was very much struggling with suicidal ideation and depression at this time in his life. He had even like the studio system, he wasn't really sure about his filmmaking future, but in like the 70s. He comes off some big successes in the 60s, and then there's apparently this whole debacle with like he was going to direct half of this 1963 movie Tora Tora Tora. He was going to direct half the film from like the Japanese perspective.
A war film with someone who else?
John Wayne, I think, is in that.
Yeah.
Yes.
This was gonna. Yeah.
It was a Pearl Harbor movie. It was, and the initial idea was one half was made by an American director about the American perspective, and one half was made about by a Japanese director about the Japanese perspective. But hey, it was a American film, and the American film executives were like, I don't know too much about showing the Japanese perspective for half the movie. What if we did like 20 minutes of it? So it became this whole big debacle that like really kind of soured Kurosawa's reputation with American Hollywood studios and the Japanese studios as well, which is why you get by the 70s, late 70s, a little guy named George Lucas coming along to Kurosawa and being like, hey buddy, your movie's like inspired the biggest movie of all time that I just made, so I will help you get back on your feet creatively. Yeah,
Inspired? Abram, you gotta watch Hidden Fortress. Number one on your list, because you're gonna watch it and you're gonna be like, it's the same plot and the same characters. Lucas, great artist steal, and he picked from good source material, and it works really well in Star Wars, but boy, is he ripping that movie straight off.
So, this
all
is
the credit to him, because who else would have come up with the idea to do that? Like, nobody else. But yeah, it's Star Wars is not a ripoff, but about as close as you can get to Hidden Fortress is like, it's the plot and the characters are just lifted right out of it.
Yeah. This is why Lucas and Coppola are listed as producers at the end of this movie, is because, they did lend some money and do some deal making on behalf of American studios to help fund Kagemusha, to help Kurosawa kind of like get back into his creative groove a little bit. And then he makes what many people refer to as a masterpiece of his run, and then his 90s output, and then he passes away in the 90s as well. But no, they were kind of like, I mean, if Lucas and Coppola didn't come along, who knows what the back half of Kurosawa's career would have looked like if he didn't make this film and like get back into the swing of making these samurai epics kind of thing, having the energy for it. But yeah, I think the whole attitude of the film is sort of informed by all that stuff as well, obviously.
Abrams' point at the very beginning about Fistful of Dollars is making me think about how this film fits into genre conversation, right? We have samurais and we have westerns, and it's a cycle. They're talking to each other the whole time. But by the time we get to the late 70s, 1980, the western genre as an output of Hollywood is like kind of dead. It's kind of not there.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, like, how does that impact Kurosawa's vision for what a samurai movie is coming out of Japan? And being, I think, an original genre, despite taking a lot from westerns and how you tell your story. And I mean, you watch Seven Samurai, and it's just like very, very clear how these things are similar. This film feels really, really different than a western. I think maybe part of the reason why we spend so much time in dialogue and in political situations, and why we shy away from guys on horsebacks doing action stuff. Like, I can imagine a world where Kurosawa is thinking about the output and the conversation that these similar films are in, and actually differentiating and choosing to go with these like kind of weird and surrealistic, like the makeup that he likes to use going forward. It's similar here in Kagemusha, where he's very thick, very chalky, very like kind of
when we have to display
looking.
someone either dying or like filled with grief or whatever, it's like slate gray ashen makeup and everything.
Yeah, and he employs this to an even more intense effect in Ron, but the beginnings of that I see here, and I think he's pulling this genre that he has a lot of authorship over to a new direction with these films, and taking it more philosophical, taking it to a more intellectual place. I think, not to say Seven Samurai is not intellectual, but I think the priorities of Kurosawa as a director are really shifted for this later part of his career. It's very interesting. man, I love this guy. This is a great filmmaker. That's maybe my biggest point.
This is broadly an interesting point just because, like I said at the top, I really am not familiar with Kurosawa. Personally, I'm more familiar with his reputation, and so as a result, I sort of expected something out of Kagemusha that it didn't end up being. Not that I think that even really factors into my middling thoughts on the film overall. I think a lot of it more so has to do with editing choices and script choices. But yeah, I think there's something to what you're saying, Timo, this perception of archetype. You guys are obviously more interested or more invested, is what I'm looking for, in sort of the progression of his filmography and sort of the changing modes in his filmmaking, but also in the context of just his actual artwork.
Yeah.
Tanner, does this film in some way represent a pretty big stylistic difference? Plot level difference from the work that he was putting out directly before?
I was looking at his output in the 70s, and yeah, I mean, it is not what you think of Kurosawa films as. It's a couple like modern set films, and one of them is like a Soviet production that like the Russian film industry came to him and asked him if he'd like to make a film for them. But then you back up to the 60s.
Isn't it Derzu or Uzala? That's the Soviet, the Soviet Kurosawa co-production.
Yes, but then you back up to the 60s, and it's like, oh yeah, Yojimbo, Sanjuro, The Bad Sleep Well, Red Beard, High and Low. Like, oh yeah, these are like really famous Kurosawa films. But yeah, you hit the 70s, and it's a real low point. And so Kagemusha is coming out of it is a really big transitional point for Kurosawa into his late career, where he also, makes interesting films in the after Ron in the 80s. In the 90s, he's making these things that very much feel inspired by the dream-like surrealistic things that he's toying with here. He makes Dreams, which is literally just a movie that is based on dreams that he has, which is crazy. He makes stuff like that. So Kagemusha, while complicated as a film and perhaps not wholly successful, is a demarcation of an interesting point in his career, which is why at the very beginning of the episode I said it is interesting. It has interesting things in it. It is playing with interesting ideas, but is certainly not as assured of a masterpiece as we've come to expect from Akira Kurosawa, potentially.
Let's begin to score, but we're talking about context here. Let's talk about Palme d'Or context.
Oh,
this
yes,
film,
of course.
As a Kurosawa film that wins Palme d'Or, but also just where it sat within the Palme d'Or world in 1980. Kurosawa doesn't win any other Palme d'Ors, right? His is his only one.
Yeah.
He does not win any Academy Awards for Best Foreign Film.
Correct.
Right?
I believe that's
true.
correct. I believe Kurosawa. Well, it could be a situation where people say, no, Akira Kurosawa never got an Oscar because it's the foreign film award is presented to the country and not the filmmaker. So one of his films may have won.
Like that.
Yeah, one of his films may have won, but technically Kurosawa himself never won an Oscar.
Rashomon won.
Rashomon. Okay. There you go. Thank you.
So
Yeah.
To think about Rashomon, a film that Western audience lauded. There, the other ones that I think, Seven Samurai is definitely lauded by Western audience.
Oh, and there's Uzala, actually.
Oh, sure. Oh,
really?
That one won Best Foreign Film. Sure. Interesting.
So, yeah, these just kind of, what's the positioning of this film in this very storied career, one of the great careers of filmmaking.
One last thing about the movie, I have to mention it. It is brief. I love the performance of our main actor, dual performance. After also obviously just coming off of Sinners as well. Tetsuya Nakarai, very good, obviously, in all the dramatic things that we talked about. Also very funny. I mean, I need to shout out the joke where they say when he's with his mistresses and he like holds the fan up and he hits the wink really quick. Incredible comedic prowess on that guy. And of course the joke where he's like, well, tell him that Shinjin cannot mount his mistresses either. Pretty funny. Good stuff.
Yeah. No, this movie actually does have genuinely
it's got
a little
jokes.
comedy.
It's
in the
got
middle there.
Okay, quick Palme details here. In 1980, Akira Kurosawa had to split the highest award, the Palme d'Or, with Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, a film that we will talk about eventually. The jury president this year was a little American actor by the name of Kirk Douglas. Other notable members of the jury, I only have one written down, is a Belgian filmmaker named Andre Delvaux. Of the 21 other films in competition that did not split the Palme d'Or, notable entries were Being There by Hal Ashby, Bye Bye
That's a great
Brazil
movie.
by Carlos Dieguez, and Out of the Blue by Dennis Hopper.
The Hopster.
The Hopster, he had a film in competition that year. Alrighty.
Okay. Should we give this a score? You guys
Yes.
ready to? Alrighty. Find out. 3, 2, 1. Chuck mine in there. Okay. We have a number. It is not a tie. The
Okay.
score is 7.6. Kagemusha is going to go squarely in between The Best Intentions on top and Titan below at spot number 21.
There you go.
There you have it. That's pretty good company, I'd say.
Pretty solid company. Yeah. What's the score breakdown, Timo?
Oh, my bad. I forgot. Abram gave it a 6.0. I gave it a 7.2. Tucker gave it an 8.4. And Tanner gave it an 8.7. So a couple scores higher than I actually thought I would be seeing there. But
Sure.
the scores they are nonetheless. Okay.
Absolutely.
Should we just move right along to our next little segment?
Let's do it.
Spin that oh so sweet spin wheel.
Oh, sweet wheel. Now, Timo,
I got a sweet tooth.
Timo, I don't mean to. Actually, I'm looking at it here though. There's only 58 entries left on the list.
Oh, let's
Whoa.
get this fixed up right here.
Okay. Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
Owen Wheels deal, as you can see right there, number 37. Where is that going to land us on the
37.
list?
Oh, it's going to land us squarely still in the 80s, a little later in the 80s, the year 1987, with a film that is starring, I think it's a French film, at least from the names, a name that I recognize here. It's a film that stars Maurice Pialat, Sandrine Bonnier, and Gérard Depardieu from director Maurice Pialat. It is 1987's Under the Sun of Satan.
Whoa.
Under the Son
crazy.
of Satan.
Mhm.
You guys know anything about this movie?
Well, I could tell you a brief one-sentence summary of its plot, if you'd like.
Okay.
Satan tempts Father Dossagnan, who is trying to save the soul of a young girl who killed one of her lovers. Sounds pretty interesting.
Okay.
That seems pretty cool.
Yeah, a drama. We'll see if how are you guys thinking on the downer scale? Is this going to be a downer,
I
or
think
is
this is
going to
be
an
a
upper?
big downer, Timo. I think this sounds like a depressing as fuck movie.
I always
98
like
minutes.
okay, 98 minutes. I like to take my guesses on whether or not a movie's going to make me happy or is it going to make me really sad. Because I would definitely wager that the majority of these Palme d'Or winners are downers.
Well, yeah, there's not a lot of happy ones in there, but we always like to come across. We always are pleasantly surprised when we find one. But Under the Son of Satan.
Under the Son of Satan. Let's hope none of us are under the Son of Satan. I don't know what that means, but we're good Christian boys here on the show.
That's right.
Very much so.
We will
Famously-
see you all
famously.
next time. Make sure you go check out our Sinners review, brand new movie. Thought it was topical right there.
Yeah.
That's all for me. Thanks for talking about Kagemusha. Good job, Akira Kurosawa. Friend of the show now. We'll
Yeah.
see everybody. Whenever the next episode
Everybody
comes out.
everywhere.
Yes, sir.
And you know what I say? Stay cool, keep warm. Peace.